that's a great success story. I've worked with a lot of privacy groups in the past, just because I have close orientation to data, and like I understand the need and the difficulty working with say GDPR, but we're also seeing this in the US as well. California's passing a law that will restrict data access, New York as well. You also like mentioned, like say like Google, they have all your information, but there's no like immediate consequences to it. I think that there possibly could be if they were to sell your data to who knows who might have it. But what they do a good job of is adding benefit back to the employee, or pardon me, to the individual person. How to get somewhere on Google Maps, and you can see if there's a wreck down the road, this sort of thing. And I'd love to get to a place where we did this in organizations. It's like democratization of your data. So please share our data with us, be comfortable with it, and we will show you benefits on the back end. It'll all be hashed. It'll all be private, but we can use this data for good, because data becomes far more valuable when it's shared.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's the direction we're headed. And you're starting to describe my new role a little bit. But, as far as like, you can take a risk-based approach with this, right? So I actually think it dovetails what you're saying there on the types of use cases. Because if you remember at the beginning of the pandemic, there was a lot of companies started implementing some pretty sketchy sounding tools, keystroke loggers, and mouse, looking at your camera to spy, because they didn't trust employees, right?
That's wild.
And it was all of that comes down to trying to measure productivity, right? And whenever you try to start to use these types of tools to measure productivity, that's where people get very, very nervous, right? So if you look at things from a spectrum across use cases, things that are used for cybersecurity to protect the organization, most of us pretty much accept that the cybersecurity team's looking at our laptop and monitoring what we're sending out to the organization. and most of us never bat an eye about that, right?
Yeah.
In our organization, if you tried to send an attachment through some email, your Gmail, sending out external to the company, there's a pop-up that reminds you, hey, this is the policy. Are you sure you want to do this? And you'd be like, no, this is my personal tax information. It's fine. But they're looking, and their system's looking at this. But most employees don't actually view that as invasive, which is kind of interesting, right? But as you start to get into the employee experience, I'm collecting and using this information to help you, to help make your life and the organization better. People will love the benefits, but maybe the methods they don't love. Maybe I start scanning all your email text, which we don't do, FYI, just for everybody listening. We don't do that, right? But you could start to imagine where I could start to use that text to prompt things for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a little too far, right? But maybe using the email and calendar metadata to try and help create policies to alleviate, certain stressors you have and improve the meeting culture. They'd be like, okay, that's okay, right? So there's like risk, involved there. And then on the other aspect is productivity, right? And so productivity is where if I'm going to start using all these tools to make sure that you are doing everything you're supposed to be doing, people get very defensive about this. And I say, especially Americans, right? So we don't mind when, right? We don't like being spied on and told what to do. And so yeah, we look at things that way. Now, the other kind of dimension to using data in this is the kind of the level of data you're using, right? So if you're using anonymous aggregated data, most of the time that's low risk.
Right.
If you're using individual level data that you anonymize, or your actions are in aggregate, right? So maybe people analytics teams, we build turnover models that'll use individual level data, but the output is completely aggregate. That's also maybe slightly more risky, but it's still, it's a little bit more than using completely aggregate data, right? But once you start to get into this space of individual level data to make individual level action, that's where you're going to start to get into big trouble. And a lot of the time, my default stance in people analytics was I would never allow that to happen. Building turnover models so that managers could go have stay conversations with individuals, I fundamentally disagree with.
Those are just horrible to begin with. Like first, just your prediction needs to be like really, really good to, have this sort of level of detail. But then what are you asking the employees to actually do? You're asking a manager to go have a very uncomfortable conversation with an employee about like, hey, like, why are you leaving? Like their model says you're about to leave. And the employee's like, what the hell am I doing in this conversation? Why am I being attacked all of a sudden for no reason?
I had no intention of leaving, but should I? Like, should I
now
think
I should. Now I should. Yeah.